Sarah Mitchell's alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m., the same time it had for the past 3 years. She rolled out of her narrow bed in the studio apartment that consumed 60% of her monthly, her feet hitting the cold hardwood floor that she couldn't afford to heat properly during Seattle's harsh winter months. At 28, Sarah had perfected the art of stretching every dollar. Her morning routine was precise and economical: instant oatmeal with a sliced banana, black coffee from the discount grocery store, and exactly 7 minutes to get dressed in clothes she'd carefully maintained since college. The only luxury she allowed herself was a real cup of coffee from Corner Café before her shift at the Riverside Community Center. The cafe was a small, family-owned business that had somehow survived the gentrification sweeping through downtown Seattle. Maria, the owner, always greeted Sarah with a warm smile, and sometimes slipped an extra pastry into her bag when she thought Sarah wasn't looking. It was one of the few places where Sarah felt like more than just another struggling young professional trying to make ends meet. Sarah worked 2 jobs to survive in the expensive city. Her main position was teaching literacy classes at the community center, working with adults who had never learned to read properly. The pay was minimal, but the work filled her heart in ways that her evening job at a telemarketing company never could. She had studied education in college, dreaming of making a difference in people's lives, and despite her financial struggles, she had never regretted that choice. This Tuesday morning felt different somehow. The air was crisper than usual, and there was an energy in the city that Sarah couldn't quite identify. As she walked toward Corner Café, she noticed more people than usual hurrying past with serious expressions, their phones pressed to their ears in urgent conversations. Sarah pushed through the cafe's heavy glass door, the warmth and aroma of fresh coffee enveloping her like a comforting embrace. She had no idea that this ordinary morning would change her life in ways she could never have imagined. Chapter 2. The Stranger on the Bench. Outside Corner Café, Marcus Chen sat on the cold metal bench, staring at the Seattle skyline that he had helped shape over the past decade. The buildings rising into the gray morning sky bore his company's name, his vision, his life's work, but this morning they felt like monuments to his failures rather than success. At 32, Marcus had built Chen Industries from a small tech startup into one of the most powerful development companies on the West Coast. He owned shopping centers, apartment complexes, office buildings, and luxury hotels throughout Seattle. His net worth was measured in billions, and his influence extended into every corner of the city's economy. But wealth and power meant nothing when your own family betrayed you. The emergency board meeting had lasted until 3 in the morning. His uncle, his cousin, and 2 longtime family friends had presented a motion to remove him as CEO, claiming he had become too reckless, too emotional, too disconnected from the company's traditional values. They wanted to install his cousin David as the new leader, someone they claimed would be more manageable. Marcus had walked out of the boardroom and into the Seattle night, unable to face returning to his penthouse apartment. He had wandered the streets for hours, seeing his city from a perspective he had never experienced before, as someone lost and alone, rather than as its master. His expensive suit was wrinkled and stained from sitting on various benches and curbs throughout the night. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and he probably looked like one of the homeless individuals he had seen around the city never really known. The irony wasn't lost on him that he owned the building housing the cafe where he now sat, yet he felt more displaced than he had ever felt in his life. Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket and stared at the dozens of missed calls and text messages. His assistant, his lawyers, his few remaining allies on the everyone wanted to know where he was and what his next move would be. But for the first time in his adult life, Marcus Chen had no plan, no strategy, no clear path forward. He was just a man sitting on a bench, questioning everything he thought he knew about loyalty, family, and success. Chapter 3. An Act of Kindness. Sarah emerged from Corner Café with her usual medium coffee, but something made her pause at the door. The man on the bench outside looked so utterly defeated that her heart ached just watching him. Despite his expensive clothes, there was something vulnerable about his posture, the way his shoulders curved inward as if he was trying to protect himself from the world. She had seen that look before in her literacy students, the expression of someone who felt overwhelmed by circumstances beyond their control. It was the same look she had worn 3 years ago when she'd first moved to Seattle with nothing but a college degree and naive optimism. Without overthinking it, Sarah turned around and went back into the cafe. "Maria, can I get another coffee to go? Medium. Black." Maria looked at her with surprise. Sarah never bought more than she could afford, and an extra coffee was a luxury that didn't fit her careful budget. "Everything okay, mija? There's someone outside who looks like he could use some warmth." Maria smiled and prepared the coffee, waving away Sarah's money when she tried to pay. "On the house, for your good heart." Sarah walked back outside, her hands wrapped around both cups for the man on the bench hadn't moved, still staring at the buildings across the street with an expression of profound sadness. "Excuse me," Sarah said softly. not wanting to startle him. "I thought you might like some coffee. It's pretty cold this morning." Marcus looked up, and Sarah was struck by his eyes. Dark, intelligent, and filled with a pain that seemed to go much deeper than physical discomfort. For a moment, he just stared at her as if he couldn't quite believe what was happening. Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse from the cold night. "You didn't have to do that." "Everyone deserves a good start to their day," Sarah replied, offering him the cup. "And sometimes we all need a little kindness from strangers." Marcus accepted the coffee with hands that trembled slightly. Whether from cold or emotion, Sarah couldn't tell. The warmth of the cup seemed to bring him back to the present moment. "Thank you," he repeated, and Sarah could hear genuine gratitude in his voice. "You have no idea what this means to me." Sarah smiled and turned to leave, completely unaware that she had just offered comfort to one of the most powerful men in the city. Chapter 4. Unexpected Encounters. The community center where Sarah worked was housed in a building that had seen better days. The Riverside Community Center served one of Seattle's most economically disadvantaged neighborhoods, offering everything from job training to childcare to the literacy classes that Sarah taught with passionate dedication. Her classroom was small and cramped, with mismatched chairs and a whiteboard that had permanent stains no amount of cleaning could remove. But when her students arrived, adults ranging from their 20s to their 70s who had never learned to read properly, the room filled with hope and determination that made all the physical shortcomings irrelevant. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah said as her Tuesday morning class settled in. "Today we're going to continue working on reading comprehension. But first, I want to hear about something good that happened to each of you since our last class." This was Sarah's favorite part of teaching. These students faced challenges that most people couldn't imagine: poverty, language barriers, learning disabilities that had never been properly diagnosed. But they always found something positive to share. Mrs. Rodriguez, a 60-year-old grandmother, raised her hand. "My granddaughter helped me read a letter from my son in the army. I understood most of it by myself." The class erupted in applause, and Sarah felt the familiar warmth that reminded her why she had chosen this profession, despite the financial struggles it entailed. As the class progressed, Sarah noticed a man in an expensive suit standing in the hallway outside her classroom. He was watching through the small window, but every time she looked directly at him, he stepped back out of view. During the break, Sarah excused herself and went into the hallway, but the man was gone. She asked Janet, the center's director, if there had been any visitors. "Oh yes. Some businessman was asking about our program, said he was interested in making a donation. I gave him a tour, but he seemed particularly interested in the literacy classes." Sarah felt a strange flutter of recognition, but she couldn't place why. She returned to her classroom, pushing the odd feeling aside to focus on her students. What she didn't know was that Marcus Chen had spent the morning walking through the city, trying to clear his head after the worst night of his professional life. When he had passed the community center, something had drawn him inside. Perhaps the memory of the kind woman who had given him coffee, or perhaps a need to see something real and meaningful in a world that suddenly felt artificial and cold. Watching Sarah teach had stirred something in Marcus that he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose, beyond profit margins and development. Chapter 5. Discovery. Marcus returned to his penthouse apartment as the sun was setting, painting Seattle's skyline in shades of gold and pink. The 30-floor apartment took up the entire top floor of the Chen Tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city he had helped build. But tonight, the luxury felt hollow. The imported marble, the custom furniture, the art collection worth millions, none of it provided the comfort he was seeking. Instead, he found himself thinking about the small classroom where he had watched Sarah teach, the genuine joy on her students' faces when they achieved small victories, the way she had given him coffee without expecting anything in return. Marcus poured himself a glass of wine and stood at the window, looking down at the city lights. Somewhere down there, Sarah was probably finishing her evening shift at whatever second job she worked to make ends meet. The thought bothered him more than it should have. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant. "James, I need you to research something. There's a teacher at the Riverside Community Center, Sarah Mitchell. I want to know everything about her background, her situation, her needs." "Sir, is this related to the board situation? Because I have 17 messages from—" "No," Marcus interrupted. "This is personal. And James, I want you to look into the community center itself, their funding, their programs, their challenges, everything." After hanging up, Marcus sat in his home office and began reading about the Riverside Community Center. What he discovered both impressed and troubled him. The center served over 2,000 people annually with a budget that was smaller than what Marcus spent on office supplies. They were constantly struggling to keep their doors open, relying on grants and donations that never seemed to be enough. Sarah's literacy program was particularly underfunded. She taught 4 classes a week to over 60 students, using outdated materials and equipment that should have been replaced years ago. According to the center's website, there was a waiting list of over 100 people who wanted to join the program, but couldn't be accommodated due to lack of resources. Marcus found himself reading testimonials from Sarah's students, stories of people whose lives had been transformed by learning to read, a single mother who could now help her children with homework, an elderly man who could finally read the letters his deceased wife had written to him during the war, a young immigrant who had landed a better job after improving his English literacy skill. As he read, Marcus realized that Sarah was accomplishing something he had never managed despite all his wealth and influence. She was making a real, tangible difference in people's lives, one person at a time. Chapter 6. The Investigation. James Chen, no relation to Marcus despite the shared surname, had been Marcus's assistant for 5 years and had learned to anticipate his boss's needs with remarkable accuracy. But this request was different from anything Marcus had ever asked for before. The research on Sarah Mitchell painted a picture of someone who had dedicated her life to helping others despite facing significant personal challenges. She had graduated summa cum laude from the University of Washington with a degree in education. But instead of pursuing higher-paying opportunities in private schools or corporate training, she had chosen to work with underserved populations. Her financial situation was precarious. She lived in a studio apartment in a building that Marcus's company had actually considered purchasing for redevelopment 2 years earlier. She worked 2 jobs, had no family in the area, and according to her social media profiles, spent most of her free time volunteering for various community organizations. What struck James most was what Sarah didn't have. No expensive purchases, no luxury vacations, no signs of the materialism that drove most people in their 20s and 30s. Her Instagram account was filled with photos of her students' achievement, community events, and the occasional coffee from Corner Café. The research on the Riverside Community Center was equally revealing. The organization was hanging on by a thread financially, constantly at risk of losing their lease or having their programs cut due to lack of funding. Sarah's literacy program was particularly vulnerable. It operated on a shoestring budget that barely covered basic supplies. James compiled his findings into a comprehensive report, but as he prepared to send it to Marcus, he hesitated. In 5 years of working for his boss, he had never seen Marcus show personal interest in someone outside his business or social circle. This felt different, more significant somehow. When James delivered the report the next morning, he found Marcus in his office earlier than usual, staring out at the city with an expression James had never seen before, something that looked almost like longing. "Sir, I have the information you requested about Sarah Mitchell and the community center." Marcus turned from the window and accepted the folder, but instead of opening it immediately, he set it on his desk and looked at James with an intensity that made his assistant slightly uncomfortable. "James, in your opinion, what makes someone truly wealthy?" The question caught James off guard. "I'm not sure I understand, sir. I own half this city, but this morning I realized I don't really know anything about the people who live in it. This woman gave me coffee yesterday morning, and I can't stop thinking about why she would do that for a complete stranger." James considered his response carefully. Maybe she understands something about kindness that the rest of us have forgotten. Chapter 7. A Plan Formed. Marcus spent the entire day reading James's report, and with each page his respect for Sarah grew. She wasn't just a teacher. She was a force for change in her community, someone who had chosen purpose over profit at every turn in her life. But what troubled Marcus most was how precarious her situation was. One medical emergency, one unexpected expense, one funding cut to the community center, and Sarah's entire life could collapse. She was living on the edge, sustained only by her determination to help others and her faith that somehow things would work out. Marcus had built his fortune by identifying problems and creating solutions. As he sat in his office that evening, a plan began to form in his mind, not just to help Sarah, but to address the larger issues facing the community center and the people it served. He started with the building that housed the Riverside Community Center. According to his record, it was owned by a small investment company that had been trying to sell it for months. The asking price was reasonable, especially for someone with Marcus's resource. If he bought the building, he could ensure the center's long-term stability and even fund improvements to their facility. But Marcus knew that simply throwing money at the situation wasn't enough. Sarah and her colleagues needed sustainable solutions, not just temporary. He began sketching out ideas for a comprehensive community development program that could serve as a model for other underserved neighborhoods. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was planning the most meaningful project of his career, while his own company was in turmoil. The board meeting that had sent him wandering the streets was scheduled to reconvene in 3 days, and Marcus still hadn't decided how to respond to his family's betrayal. But for the first time since the crisis began, Marcus felt a sense of clarity about what truly mattered. Success wasn't just about building wealth or accumulating power. It was about using those resources to create positive change. And as he worked late into the night, Marcus found himself thinking about Sarah's smile when she had handed him the coffee, the genuine warmth in her eyes when she told him that everyone deserved a good start to their day. She had seen him at his lowest moment and had responded with kindness rather than judgment. Marcus wanted to return that kindness. But he also wanted to do something more significant. He wanted to show Sarah that her work mattered, that her students mattered, that the community she served deserved the same opportunities and resources that were available in the wealthier parts of the city. By dawn, Marcus had outlined a plan that would transform not just the Riverside Community Center, but the entire neighborhood surrounding it. All he needed now was the courage to set it in motion. Chapter 8. The Revelation. Sarah was in the middle of teaching her Thursday morning class when Janet, the community center director, appeared in the doorway with an expression of barely contained excitement. She gestured for Sarah to step into the hallway, and Sarah could see that Janet was practically vibrating with nervous energy. "Sarah, we need to talk. There's someone here to see you, someone very important. Can it wait? I'm in the middle of a lesson on—" "No, it can't wait. Trust me on this." Janet's voice carried an urgency that Sarah had never heard before. "Mrs. Patterson can cover your class for a few minutes." Confused but trusting Janet's judgment, Sarah followed her down the hallway toward the center's small conference room. Through the glass door, she could see a man in an expensive suit sitting at the table, and her heart skipped a beat as she recognized it was the stranger from the bench, the man she had given coffee to 3 days earlier. But he looked completely different, composed, confident, and somehow more substantial. His hair was perfectly styled, his suit was immaculate, and he carried himself with an authority that hadn't been evident when she'd first met him. "Sarah," Janet said as they paused outside the conference room, "I want you to meet Marcus Chen. He's the CEO of Chen Industries." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Chen Industries was one of the largest development companies in Seattle. She had seen their name on buildings throughout the city, including the apartment complex where she lived. This was the man she had given coffee to? This was the stranger she had worried might be homeless? Marcus stood as they entered the room, and Sarah could see recognition in his eyes, along with something that looked like nervousness, which seemed impossible for someone of his obvious power and influence. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "It's good to see you again." Sarah shook his hand automatically, her mind reeling. I don't understand. You're Marcus Chen? The Marcus Chen?" "I am, and you're the woman who gave me coffee when I needed it most." His smile was warm and genuine, the same expression she had seen briefly on the bench. "I've been hoping to see you again so I could properly thank you." Janet was looking between them with growing confusion. "You two know each other?" "We met briefly," Marcus said, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "Ms. Mitchell showed me a kindness that I won't forget." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the revelation. The man she had thought might be down on his luck was actually one of the wealthiest people in the city. The coffee that had seemed like such a small gesture had been given to someone who could probably buy the entire cafe without thinking twice about it. "I need to get back to my class," Sarah said, feeling suddenly self-conscious about her simple clothes and modest circumstances. "Of course," Marcus said, "but I was hoping we could talk afterward. There's something important I'd like to discuss with you." Chapter 9. An Unexpected Proposal. After her class ended, Sarah found herself back in the conference room with Marcus and Janet, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that Marcus had insisted on buying from Corner Cafe. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. 3 days ago, she had bought him coffee, and now he was returning the favor. "Ms. Mitchell," Marcus began, "I want you to know that our encounter the other morning had a profound impact on me. I was going through a difficult time, and your kindness reminded me of something important that I had lost sight of." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "It was just coffee. Anyone would have done the same thing, but they didn't," Marcus said quietly. "Hundreds of people walked past me that morning, and only you stopped. Only you saw someone who needed help." He leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "I've spent the past few days learning about your work here, about the community center, about the challenges you face. I'm impressed by what you've accomplished with so few resources." Janet nodded enthusiastically. "Sarah's literacy program has the highest success rate of any adult education program in the state. She's amazing, which is why I have a proposal," Marcus continued. "I want to fund a complete renovation and expansion of the Riverside Community Center. New building, new equipment, expanded programs, and full funding for at least the next 10 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stared at Marcus, certain she had misheard him. Janet's mouth had fallen open, and she looked like she might faint. "I'm sorry," Sarah said slowly. "Did you just say you want to fund a complete renovation?" "I did, but there's more." Marcus pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. "I want to create the Sarah Mitchell Center for Community Education. You would be the director, with a staff of your choosing, and a budget that would allow you to serve 10 times as many students as you currently. Sarah felt dizzy. I don't understand. Why would you do this? Because you showed me that real wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the positive impact you have on other people's lives. You're rich in ways that I'm still learning to understand. Marcus's voice became softer, more personal. I've spent my entire adult life building an empire, accumulating power and influence. But I've never done anything as meaningful as what you do in that classroom every day. I want to change that. Sarah looked at Janet, who was nodding encouragingly, then back at Marcus. This is too much. I can't accept something like this. You're not accepting charity, Marcus said firmly. You're accepting recognition for work that deserves proper support. The only condition is that you continue doing exactly what you're already doing, changing people's lives through education. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes as the magnitude of what Marcus was offering began to sink in. Not just for her, but for all the students who were waiting for a chance to learn, for all the families who needed the center's services, she whispered. Marcus smiled, and Sarah saw the same vulnerability she had glimpsed on the bench. Because you gave coffee to a stranger and expected nothing in return. Because you chose purpose over profit. Because you're everything I want to become. Chapter 10. A New Understanding. The weeks following Marcus's proposal passed in a whirlwind of meetings, planning sessions, and legal paperwork. Sarah found herself thrust into a world she had never imagined. Architects and contractors, budgets with more zeros than she had ever seen, and decisions that would affect hundreds of people's lives. Throughout it all, Marcus was a constant presence, but not in the overwhelming way Sarah had expected. He listened more than he spoke, asked thoughtful questions about the community's needs, and deferred to Sarah's expertise about education and social services. It became clear that his offer wasn't about imposing his vision, but about empowering hers. As they worked together, Sarah began to see past Marcus's wealth and status to the person under. He was brilliant and driven, but also lonely, and searching for meaning beyond his business success. The night he had spent on the streets had been a turning point, forcing him to confront the emptiness that his achievements had failed to fill. Can I ask you something? Sarah said one afternoon as they reviewed architectural plans in his office. What happened that night? The night I met you? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the Seattle skyline. My family tried to remove me from my own company. People I trusted, people I loved, decided I wasn't worth their loyalty anymore. I'm sorry. That must have been devastating. It was. But it also freed me to see things differently. He turned to look at her. I realized I'd been so focused on building an empire that I'd forgotten to build a life worth living. Sarah understood that feeling more than she could express. I've been so focused on helping others that I sometimes forget to take care of myself. Maybe we both needed to learn about balance. Maybe we did. Marcus smiled, and Sarah felt something shift between them, a recognition of shared understanding that went beyond their different circumstances. The board meeting that had started Marcus's crisis was resolved when he returned with a new vision for Chen Industries. Instead of just developing properties for maximum profit, the company would focus on community-centered projects that balanced financial success with social responsibility. The Sarah Mitchell Center would be their flagship project, a model for future developments. Some board members resigned in protest, including Marcus's uncle and cousin. But new investors stepped forward, attracted by the innovative approach and the positive publicity it generated. Marcus discovered that doing good was also good business. As the groundbreaking ceremony for the new center approached, Sarah found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed since that Tuesday morning when she had given coffee to a stranger. She had gained not just professional opportunities, but also a friendship that had enriched her life in ways she was still discovering. The evening before the ceremony, Marcus invited Sarah to dinner at his penthouse. As they stood on his balcony, looking out over the city lights, Sarah realized that the view looked different, not like a collection of buildings, but like a community full of people with dreams and struggles and hopes for the future. Chapter 11. Full Circle. The grand opening of the Sarah Mitchell Center for Community Education drew hundreds of people from across Seattle. The new building was beautiful, modern and welcoming, with spacious classrooms, a computer lab, a library, and even a cafe run by Maria from Corner Cafe, who had been offered the contract as part of the Community Partnership Program. Sarah stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd that included her former students, community leaders, city officials, and media representatives. But her eyes kept returning to Marcus, who stood in the back of the room with a smile that radiated genuine pride and happiness. 6 months ago, Sarah began, I was teaching literacy classes in a cramped room with outdated materials and a dream that seemed impossible to achieve. Today, we're opening a center that will serve thousands of people annually, offering not just education, but hope for a better future. She paused, finding Marcus in the crowd again. This center exists because of the generosity of Marcus Chen and Chen Industries. but it also exists because of something much simpler. The belief that every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change the world. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse, Marcus approached Sarah with 2 cups of coffee from Maria's new café. "I thought it was time I returned the favor," he said, offering her one of the cups. Sarah laughed, accepting the coffee. "I think you've more than returned the favor." "Actually, I don't think I have." Marcus's expression became more serious. "You gave me something that morning that was worth more than all of this. You gave me hope when I had lost faith in humanity. You reminded me that there are still good people in the world who help others without expecting anything in return. And you showed me that success doesn't have to come at the expense of compassion," Sarah replied. "You could have just written a check and walked away, but instead, you chose to be part of the solution." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as families toured the new facility. Children played in the bright, welcoming spaces, and adults signed up for classes that would help them build better lives for themselves and their... "You know," Marcus said, "I've been thinking about expanding this model to other cities. Would you be interested in helping me develop a national program?" Sarah looked at him with surprise. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a partnership. You bring the vision and expertise. I bring the resources and business acumen. Together, we could create centers like this across the country." Sarah considered the proposal, thinking about all the communities that could benefit from programs like theirs. "On one condition." "Name it." "We never forget that it all started with a cup of coffee, and the belief that everyone deserves kindness." Marcus smiled and raised his coffee cup in a toast. To coffee, kindness, and the power of unexpected connections. As they clinked their cups together, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A simple act of compassion had transformed both their lives, proving that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the smallest gestures. The poor woman who had given coffee to a stranger had discovered not just that he was a billionaire, but that wealth meant nothing without the richness of human connection and the purpose that came from helping others.